If you own woodland, you can simply disappear into the trees and live there in peace, if only. But that doesn't really match how things work in practice. Woodland may hide you from view, but it doesn't hide you from planning law, forestry legislation, or environmental protection. Because once you actually try to live in woodland, the system starts behaving very differently. Is woodland really an escape from regulation, or one of the hardest places to justify living? Living on the road, waterways, or off-grid in the UK. Dickie Dread. This is part 25 in the video series, and we're on chapter 3 still, living on the land or water, parking up and planning reality. Today we will cover woodland, charcoal and alternative uses. Woodland often attracts interest because it feels hidden, quiet and separate from the systems that regulate more open land. Trees create a natural screen. Tracks are informal. Boundaries are less obvious. It gives the impression that you can operate without being seen and therefore without being controlled. In practice, the opposite is often true. Woodland is one of the more tightly regulated categories of land use, and once activity becomes visible, enforcement can be swift and difficult to resist. While the detail varies between England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, the overall approach to woodland, controlled use with limited scope for residential occupation, is consistent across the UK. A key layer of control comes from the Forestry Act 1967. This governs the felling of trees, and in most cases you need a felling licence from the relevant forestry authority before cutting timber beyond very small thresholds. Even where land is privately owned, the trees themselves are subject to regulation. Removing them to create space, access or visibility can trigger enforcement in its own right, entirely separate from any planning issue. Alongside this sits general planning control under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. Woodland is usually designated as forestry or agricultural land, and residential use is not automatically permitted. Living on woodland, whether in a caravan, a cabin or any other structure, is treated as a material change of use. It clearly falls within an existing lawful use or has planning permission. The presence of trees does not relax this requirement. If anything, it makes unauthorised use more noticeable once it is discovered, because it stands out against what is expected of the land type. There are also additional controls that can apply depending on the site. Woodland is often subject to tree preservation orders or located within conservation areas, both of which restrict works to trees. In some cases, it may be designated as ancient woodland, which carries even stronger protections in planning policy. These layers do not directly prohibit living on the land, but they limit what can be altered, and that in turn restricts how the land can be used. Because of this, people often look for a legitimate use to anchor their presence. Activities such as woodland management, coppicing, charcoal production or small-scale forestry operations are commonly cited. These can indeed be lawful uses of the land. Producing charcoal, for example, can fall within forestry activity and does not in itself require a change of use. It is also cited as one activity that requires monitoring for more than 24 hours. I know a couple of people who've done charcoal to get away with this. But this is where the distinction becomes important. A legitimate land use does not automatically justify residential occupation. Planning policy across the UK, particularly in England, through the National Planning Policy Framework, focuses on functional need when considering whether someone can live on land in connection with a rural enterprise. In woodland settings, that threshold is difficult to meet. The work typically does not require a constant on-site presence in the way that livestock farming might. As a result, applications for dwellings in woodland contexts are often refused on the basis that there is no essential need for someone to live there full time. This is why woodland can feel paradoxical. It appears to offer freedom because it is visually enclosed and often remote, but in planning terms, it lacks the recognised pathways that make residential use easier to justify elsewhere. There is no simple route from activity to dwelling unless the activity is substantial, continuous, and clearly demands on-site presence. That said, people do attempt to work within and around these constraints. One approach is to maintain activity at a level that remains low impact and difficult to classify. Occasional use, minimal infrastructure, and careful management of visibility can delay enforcement. Another is to build a case over time, documenting genuine forestry activity and attempting to demonstrate a need for supervision or security. In rare cases, temporary permissions have been sought on that basis, though success is limited and highly site-specific. There are also misconceptions about time-based loopholes. As with other land use, there is a 10-year period after which a continuous breach of planning control can potentially become lawful if it has not been enforced against. But this requires clear evidence of uninterrupted use, and it offers no protection if enforcement action is taken within that period. In woodland, where visibility can change quickly due to complaints, inspections, or even seasonal changes in foliage, relying on time alone is particularly risky. Another commonly assumed workaround is that temporary or movable structures avoid planning control. In reality, it's not the structure itself but its use that matters. A caravan, yurt, or mobile setup used as a place of residence can still constitute development in planning terms, especially when combined with associated activities such as access tracks, storage, or waste disposal. What tends to determine outcome in woodland is not just what is done, but how clearly it can be seen and understood by others. A hidden presence can exist for a time, but once it becomes known through neighbours, walkers, forestry office, or chance observation, it is assessed against a framework that is not particularly forgiving. Unlike open agricultural land, where there are established arguments around rural enterprise, woodland lacks an easy narrative for residential use. In that sense, woodland sits at an awkward intersection. It offers practical concealment but limited legal flexibility. It allows activity that resists settlement, but looks like settlement. What looks like freedom on first inspection often turns out to be a constraint once the full set of regulations are engaged. So woodland offers concealment but very little legal flexibility. Places that appear to offer the greatest freedom may actually be among the most tightly controlled, which means the issue may not just be whether you can live quietly in the woods. It might actually be whether any land can be used for residential living without fitting into the planning system. How much freedom does land ownership really provide? Next up, we're still in Chapter 3, Living on the Land or Water, Parking Up and Planning Reality, and we're going to cover national parks and protected landscapes.